This podcast is brought to you in part by Dragon Shield. Use code PLAYTOWIN5 at the affiliate link down below for 5% off to help support the show.
Welcome to the Play to Win podcast, where we talk about winning in cEDH. I'm Cam.
And I'm Dylan. This week we are talking about fringe decks in cEDH.
That's right. Our patron Reactive sent us a little message and said, I would love to have an episode on fringe cEDH. It seems to me, at least after the bans, there have been some neat attempts at off-the-norm decks pop up and do somewhat well.
Yeah.
Not saying that they're optimal, but they're still cool to see. In my opinion, there is some benefit to being fringe, since a lot of people are familiar with the meta and know what to interact with normally. But there are downsides, as you can really only run fringe once in a while, since A, they normally are fringe for a reason and lose to interaction easily, or B, people will just crush you once they learn how to interact.
Yeah.
Just thought that it would be cool to talk about this in a post-ban era.
Brewer's advantage, I think, is a real thing. You know how your deck works and your opponent don't. And your opponents doesn't? Your opponents don't. They don't. That's right, the way that I said it.
Them don't know anything about decks.
Them don't know how my deck work. I know how my deck work. Brewer's advantage, I think, is a real thing in cEDH, in Commander specifically, because the format is so gigantic, and a lot of the combos, realistically, there are several 2-card combos at around 6 to 8 mana, and even though that's a lot, that can be pulled off pretty easily. So if your opponents don't know exactly what you're doing or what you're trying to get to, it can be a good way to sneak in some games. I feel like a lot of top 4s that we see, not all of them, but a lot of them are like some Tymna deck, some other Tymna deck, maybe a Krark deck, and some deck you've never heard of. They all look something like that, right? Like 2 very tier 1 decks, a tier 2-ish deck, and some deck that Plagon or something, right?
Yeah, well, I guess that's my first question then about these fringe decks is, what's the line between a meta deck and a fringe deck? Like, is tier 3 considered fringe, or is that still, like, because we see it in tournament cEDH, is it no longer fringe, even though one person brought it and did well with it?
Yeah, see, I don't know. I think that depends on a person to person. To me, fringe is anything that's like realistically tier 3. What's the line for tier 3? I don't know. It's where your brain decides to put it. My gut reaction says things like Tymna Kraum, Tymna Thrasios, Kinnan, Sisay, Rogsai, that's like tier 1. You know, maybe there's an argument for Tymna Kraum is tier 0, but those, I guess 5 decks or maybe one that I'm missing, that's like tier 1. And then everything under that is stuff like Yuriko, Obnixilis, decks that you'll see in tournaments, but they don't win a ton of tournaments, but they're like playable, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like they're decks that people still bring in mass droves to tournaments. I think that outside of power, also representation matters here.
Yeah.
So because you see so many of the tier 1 decks and a slightly smaller percent of the tier 2 decks, that means that they're still a little bit separate, but it also keeps them out of the fringe decks because they're being brought to tournaments more frequently.
Right, yeah. So I think, and then everything below that. Now, I only mentioned like 2 decks for the tier 2. There are more decks that are in tier 2. I
think tier 2 is pretty big.
It's pretty big, realistically. But I think the line between tier 2 and fringe is like very, very gray. So a deck that I lost to this past tournament was Green-White Silvala.
That's actually one of the decks I have here. Yeah.
Yeah, I consider that deck a fringe deck because I have never seen it in a tournament besides this. Normally, decks like this are decks that like one person does well with at tournaments because they know the deck inside and out. Maybe Oswald is another good example of a fringe deck where I know Dalton, one person does really well with that Oswald deck, and there are others too. I'm not saying that they're not, but
from what we've seen in our close by experience.
Yeah, so
exactly.
A little bit of it for me is like just like gut. That feels fringe. I don't see it a ton. It's my perception, and that's kind of why I mentioned that these lines are gray, right?
Yeah,
it's not exact.
I think that's a really good point to make. To me, fringe also has to have like been around for a while, and no one's really using it either. Because like mono green Silvala, I would still say like is fringe, but also doesn't have the Brewer's advantage aspect because of how long it's been around. To me, that kind of means that there is a separation between tier 3 and fringe, because tier 3 is
known decks, known quantities.
Known decks that might not be a part of the meta anymore, but at one point could have been a part of the meta because the combos are known. People know how Marwyn works. People know how Silvala works. People know how Shorakai works. But like the Green-White Silvala list, I think is a little bit more on the fringe side of things because it's something that's A, up and coming, or B, something that like no one else is winning with.
Yeah. So so for you, like fringe is a little bit less than tier 3. So like Winota, is that tier 3 or fringe?
It probably depends on what the metagame looks like. like too.
Yeah.
Because right now
we're talking about.
Right
Right
now,
now,
I would
2025.
say Winoda's tier 3 because
Tier
I
three.
I think Winoda's on the upswing because people are realizing that the games are really slow. We have time to get Winoda out and start attacking, and we can stop people from winning with our creatures and just snowball the game because combat damage can actually win rounds of cEDH now.
Yeah, so I have been thinking about that a lot actually with Winota specifically. Like, are we getting to a point, these games are going long, are we getting to a point where Winota can deal damage? Here's where I'm not sure about if that's actually true. When we say games of going long, they feel long. But if you think back, what turn did they end?
Oh, like 5 or 7.
Still
yeah.
5 or 6. Like, still realistically, oftentimes not super late. Sometimes that 4-hour game in the semifinals, that probably, actually, looking back, I think that game did not go very long in turn-wise. I think it was only like turn 7 or 8 or something.
Yeah, because most of the time equity was spent talking about
Making
what's
game
going
action.
on.
So
yeah.
like, even though the games are going longer, they're feeling longer, their term count, it's not like we're having 10 turn games, anything. They're still ending on turn 6, which is later than turn 4, which is where they were ending most often, I would say, a year ago. Now they're turn 6. But is turn 5 or 6 or 7, is that enough time for Winota to really kill the table?
I guess
Sometimes,
that makes sense.
I
yeah.
don't know about consistently can it do that.
No, especially if you get interacted with once, then you're done.
Right,
Like, I feel like
yeah.
if you can get Winota and you can get a big attack in, then yeah, you're probably going to be set up a little bit more. But one bounce spell shuts you off, takes you completely back, and then it's not going to be like turn 5 until you can get Winota out again.
Right. So yes, I do agree that Winota, I do think, is a little bit on the upswing, especially if the games are going slower. But like I said, since they're not going turn-wise longer, I'm not actually sure if that'll play out how we think it might in our head.
To be fair, I have not lost to Winota since it's been back on the upswing. So
Yeah.
maybe we're onto something here.
Yes, but I do kind of agree with you that I think there like a notable difference between Fringe and Tier 3 is Fringe is like they're on their fringe of the formats, and I think that means that people don't really know what they do. So yes, I agree. Something like Winota, everyone knows what Winota does. It attacks for big, and sometimes it wins with Kiki Jiki. If you're in a tournament, you know roughly what Winota does. Whereas something like, at least for me, Silvala, Green-White Silvala, I don't really know how that deck wins. It has been around for a while, but it's been bad for so long. And now we're in this world where everyone is planning on interacting a ton. So when Silvala draws the table at 6 cards apiece and passes the turn, Silvala knows that they're probably all going to fight amongst each other, and they're going to deal with each other, right? Rather than just giving one person the ability to pop off. And it's a deck that I don't exactly, even still now, know how it wins. I know roughly it's going to draw its deck and win somewhere, but as I was playing against the deck, I wasn't able to pinpoint an exact good moment of like, where do I interact here? Like, yes, getting rid of the commander is good, but it's still doing all those mono green commander stuff, which is a little bit confusing sometimes.
Well, I think those two things that you just said are other really good key identifiers to what a fringe deck is. And the first one that you mentioned is they're doing something that's messing with the metagame. Like they can operate outside of the metagame and kind of mess with the other players' heads, especially because they don't know what they're doing. They're wondering why they're getting fed 18 cards to the entire table, and then that's causing them to misplay into the deck. They're not really aware of how they're misplaying because they don't know how to play correctly
they don't know
against it.
They don't know the game that they're playing.
Exactly,
This is,
yeah.
I think a trap that I found into is like, I've just drawn 6 cards. I got a full grip. I can go for the win. Not fully realizing all my opponents draw 6 cards each. They can go for the win. And even if I didn't see them draw removal spells or counter spells, because in my head, I'm like, I just saw the 6 cards you drew. They were all shit and you're tapped out. But you kept your hand because it had Force of Will and Active Negation and Mindbreak Trap in it already because you're planning on not dying early in the game. So you have that protection. So all that to say that, yeah, I think Fringe decks specifically, I don't want to say they prey on the meta, but they are aware of the meta.
Yeah.
Even though they don't do the same thing as what a lot of the metagame decks do, they attack the metagame in an interesting way.
And there was a second thing that you said at the tail end of that I also thought was a really good identifier for a fringe deck, and I can't remember what it was now.
Oh, I'm so glad that you brought up that you don't remember what it is.
Well,
because
I said
I don't remember what I said
that
either.
there were 2 things was the problem, and then I said this is the first one, and then I never said what the second one was.
Maybe you can cut back in post or something. As you know, I'm pretty close to browning out at this point. I don't know what's going on at all. This is a different character. This isn't the real Dylan. I've slipped into another guy.
Slipped into another guy.
But I have no idea what I said. But yeah, I think fringe decks, I don't want to use the word prey on, but they attack the metagame.
Oh, and the other thing was that you don't know when to interact either. Like that.
Okay,
that's the other main thing too. Like mono green Silvala, we know where to interact, kill Silvala, and I do think that ends up being another hallmark of these fringe decks is that the solution to a lot of them just becomes kill the commander. I don't need to learn what your deck does because 99% of the time these fringe decks are built around on their commander entirely
Right.
and can't operate because they have 50 to 30 cards in their deck that are like only good when their commander's out and
Right.
like are just dead shit in their hand when they don't have it.
And I think Savala, green-white Savala's fix to the issue is not that you don't exactly know when to interact, but it's just much more difficult to interact because Savala has Grand Abolisher and Savala has Silence and Savala has other white cards that can help protect their shit, which I think is like a big, huge boost.
Yeah, I think so too.
Kark decks, I think, are another, and I don't know that I would call them fringe decks exactly because a lot of them are, they're strong decks, but they are decks that attack the meta, I think, in an interesting way, similar to green-white Savala, where number one, they give your opponents a lot of choices. The decision overload is a real thing. You're going to cast 700 spells. Your opponents don't know which one to interact with. They all seem good, right? So I think Kark does a similar thing.
I think we're at the point though where Kark is out of fringe now and firmly in tier 2 in my brain.
I mean, what's it called when? Because there is a difference there. Like tier 2 decks that still do attack the meta in an interesting way. Those aren't really fringe decks.
I think that's just a tier 2 deck.
It's just a tier 2
and
deck.
It's an aspect of the deck that makes it good and puts it into tier 2 right now. And it's basically just like we just have 4 categories. It's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and fringe. Like fringe could be called tier 4, just like unpopular decks that 3 people play.
Yeah.
The other thing that it could be is also casual commanders that people are trying to power up into cEDH that maybe don't quite make it to cEDH, but like you can play them. They're just like a bad cEDH deck. It's fringe.
And I think I want to mention here that I don't know that tier 1 decks specifically mean most powerful deck. I don't think that's actually what it is.
Agreed.
I don't think that it means, I think what it means is in a lot of ways easy decks. They are the easy decks because those are the tier 1 decks are the decks that the most people do well with, that a ton of people are doing well with Tim Necrom. It is good, but I don't think that's the only reason people do well with it. They do well with it because it's kind of straightforward. You're playing the best cards in the format in Thassa's Oracle shit. Whereas Kark, I think Kark is hard as hell to play. And if realistically we all had supercomputer brains, I think Kark would be the meta game. But it's a difficult deck to play, and I think that holds it back. Not because it's a worse deck, but because just it's hard to play.
People just don't want to have to flip coins for 45 minutes.
Yeah, not even a matter of don't want to. When they do, they play it wrong. They want to, but they still fuck it up. And I'm not saying all you Kark players suck. In fact, a lot of Kark players are really skilled because they're playing that fucking deck.
You kind of have to be.
They have to be to continue to do well with it. But I think that's like an important distinction that like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, fringe, it doesn't necessarily connotate strength of a deck. It's a big portion of it. That's part of the puzzle. But like easiness to play is also a big part of it. I've talked about this before. One of the reasons that I think Timna Thrasios is so good is because I can recover. I can make mistakes and I can recover from those mistakes and still win the game. It is like, I don't want to say idiot proof, but it's just like, that's how the deck operates. Whereas Kark decks, you can't really mess up. You know what I mean? There are some other decks, green-white Savala deck probably, if you miscount your mana and you go for it at the wrong time, or you get to the end of your loop and you go, whoops, I don't actually make enough or whatever, yeah, it's hard to come back from that. You don't have counter spells to keep yourself in the game. You don't have a depth of powerful cards to let you to keep going. So,
I think that feeds into the tiers being more about the representation of decks as opposed to the power level. I think that power level has something to do with the representation of a deck, but I think that there's like 3 or 4 different trees that branch off from what the tier is and what like representation of a deck actually is. It's the Amulet Titan decks in Modern. I feel like I've always had that stereotype too, where they're so strong and it would be a tier 1 deck and people would be advocating for the banning of Amulet of Vigor in Modern if everyone knew how to play the deck.
If only everyone knew how to play the deck. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You have picked up a fringe deck recently. Do you want to talk about, I mean, not recent.
Is that fringe or is he tier 3?
Atali.
Yeah, Atali.
I think right now Atali's fringe. I think before the bans, Atali was tier 3, maybe tier 2.
I'll give you that.
I think he's
Ian
fringe
doing
now.
well with the deck in one tournament. I do not think
that doesn't mean anything.
No, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah,
you
no
could
offense
give him,
to Ian. Actually, props to Ian. Ian can win with anything.
You could give him a dead cat and he would win a tournament.
Yeah, if Ian wins a tournament with a deck, truthfully, this doesn't mean that the deck is good. Ian can win with anything. So it doesn't necessarily mean, and that's another thing that I also want to mention now that we're talking about tiers. Realistically, the best way to win tournaments of Magic is to be a good player. The deck that you play, honestly, not relevant. Like,
no, it's more helpful to know your deck inside and out and be able to do whatever you can to recover in your deck that people don't know about.
Right.
And that's something that's going to make you win tournaments.
Yeah, picking the best deck is only realistically 20%.
I was going to say that exact number.
Yeah, 25% of the puzzle. 50% of the puzzle is that you know your deck and you know it well. And then 25% of the puzzle is like
knowing the format.
All right, let me say 25% of it is your deck, 50% of it is your skill level, maybe 20% of it is knowing the format as a whole, and then 5% is just like, are you tired? Did you eat? Is your brain in like, are you like sad about a breakup right now, or are you like happy and excited? You know what I mean? Like those things I do actually think have an effect on it, but probably closer to like only 5%.
Yeah, physical and emotional well-being, I would say but that I think category
50% is your own personal skill with your deck. 20% of it, maybe more, is of the format. Maybe that should be a little bit closer of like knowing the format, especially in cEDH, knowing when to talk to your opponents. Hey, Kark can win from here. Don't listen to them. Sisay can win from here. Don't listen to them. Telling the table that sometimes your opponents don't know. I didn't realize the other day I was playing against Master of Keys. I'm like rambling on here right now, but
tell me your Master Key story.
I was playing against Master of Keys. They had a Loris and a Lotus Petal in the graveyard, and they put Displacer Kitten on the stack. And I was like, yeah, this is fine, right? And someone's like, no. I play against Mimeoplasms. There is a loop right here between Loris and Displacer Kitten and Lotus Petal that they can win the game by casting Lotus Petal from the graveyard with Loris, using the Displacer Kitten to flicker the Loris so that it's fresh again, sacking the Lotus Petal for mana, and then repeating that loop for infinite mana. So had my opponents not spoken up about that, I would have had no idea. So knowing the format is almost as important, if not more so maybe, than your skill with the deck.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why Fringe decks and pilots of Fringe decks can do very well, is because they're good players. That matters more than the deck that they're playing.
Atali, though, back to Atali. Do you want to talk about a little bit of Atali? Because I feel like you've been having a great time with it.
Atali's been fucking awesome to be back on. Yeah, it's just so much fun, just taking everyone's cards and piecing together wins out of the stuff that you find. I guess I wasn't expecting to talk about it as a Fringe deck because like there's a lot of personal bias that goes into it, but it really is Fringe. Like it's not doing very well in tournaments. It's not seeing play outside of like cEDH pickup games that you do, right?
I kind of look at it this way, if I may. I think it's actually a very good deck for beginners for a few reasons, and then it's like Kark in the way that it just puts all the variants on the table kind of in one action, right? So like it's good for new players, I think, because it shows you the whole format pretty quickly. As you're exiling your opponent's cards, you're seeing a Tainted Pact, and you're seeing this, and you're seeing that.
Talk about information.
Right, so you get a quick idea of like, how do I sequence all these other cards together to put together a win? And the other part of it is that it puts like all the math on the table right at one time. Because if you do 2 Atalis, if you Twin Flame your Atali and get to cast 8 spells total, you're probably gonna find a win. Like you're probably gonna be able to do that. It feels like luck. It feels like, what are the odds that Atali found 2 things? But it's really not. It's 8 spells. You know what I mean? So it does what Kark does, was rather than like tricking you into thinking that you can win the game from all points of it, it just says, let's put all that luck right here. And you lose the game or you win the game right now.
Right now,
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of good for a Fringe deck to be able to say, I'm going to try right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And it does kind of fit the mold of another one of these decks that's entirely built around the commander, and like every card in the deck is trying to do the commander's thing.
Or get rid of the thing that stops the commander from coming out, right? Like Drannith Magistrate is huge in your brain when you play Atali.
Oh, yeah, exactly, yeah.
So like your whole deck is either make Atali good, do good Atali things, or stop the 2 or 3 things that shut off my deck.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My brain is like completely melting right now. I don't know why I can't think about Atali stuff.
Am I talking to you?
No, I'm just having a hard time thinking about Atali for some reason. But yeah, and I think that's something else that makes Atali Fringe, is that there are like those silver bullet pieces that like I can't just win around. Like Thrasios Timna Crown, like a lot of those tier 1 decks can go, okay, well, you have that thing in play. I can win around that thing by going through one of my many other win conditions. Whereas like I have to constantly be considering, is there a heuristic study in play for my food chain win that I'm trying to do? Is there a Drannith Magistrate I have to get rid of in order to find Fury or Pyrokinesis first? Like there's a lot more of those kind of points where I have to be more considerate of what my deck is trying to do as opposed to what the rest of the table is trying to do.
Yeah, I guess it's a good point. So I don't know if that's necessarily tied to Fringe or
that
Atali
might just be more of an
specifically.
Atali thing. Yeah.
Because I would consider some Fringe decks like Shurikai. Last time I played Shurikai, the goal was just not die. Just not die as long as possible. Play the blue-white controller-ish route until you cannot die, and then you can set up your win after that. So I don't think that it's always focused on yourself, but it is more singularly focused. I think a lot of Fringe decks are.
Yeah.
Because we're in mid-range hell, decks like Timna Crom and Timna Thrasios, I can decide what game I want to play based off of my hand, based off of my opponents. I can go fast, I can go slow. I can make all of those choices. I can play the game however I want. It's a mid-range deck. Whereas a lot of Fringe decks, they're either bad mid-range decks, and a lot of times, why would you play that bad mid-range decks? Or they do something completely else, which is they're more singular focused, or they're focused on one aspect of the metagame.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's just like, it's more all in on that one thing versus being able to attack it at multiple different axes.
Yeah.
I think that was a bit of a better way to say it. That's more universal instead of just only being Atali focused. Yeah.
And I think that aspect of those fringe decks, I wonder if like that's what keeps those fringe decks less powerful, because we're in mid-range hell. We've said that a whole bunch of times. Like singleton commander, 100 cards, it has a tough time with variance. So if you can curve that variance, or at least feel like you're curving that variance by deciding what game that you want to play, a lot of those decks are easier to pick up and thus do a lot better in tournaments. Whereas decks like Krark and Atali, they don't do that. They can't really pick their game quite as well. I think players have a hard time converting that into wins. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that does make sense. Yeah, your pod composition matters a lot more when you're playing a fringe deck too, because there's some fringe decks that just like have way worse matchups. Like matchups matter to you more in a fringe decks versus like when you're just playing the best partner pairs.
Yeah.
A lot of times the upside to playing fringe decks outside of everything else is that there is like one other line that you could take. Like there's a reason for me not to play Thrasios Tymna, because Tasigur lets me birthing pod into a Hoarding Broodlord line by finding Scholar of the Lost Troves in Neoform. That's one's just been on my mind a lot recently.
Yeah, you have to have a good reason, I think.
It has to be a good reason. And a one-card win condition can be a good reason too. Yeah. It just has to be a really good reason.
Like it's a cycle, right? Because we see less fringe decks because a lot of players don't want to bring a fringe deck to a tournament, and then so they don't bring them to a tournament. Those decks are fringe decks. Because they're fringe decks, no one knows how they work, so every once in a while they do well at a tournament. It's kind of a cycle.
Very parasitic. That's really funny.
Like,
yeah. But you see them in your cEDH games more often.
Yeah.
Like I'm not as willing to bring Atali to a tournament because I know that I'm not playing blue in that deck, and that's just not something I want when I want to go to a tournament. But I'm more willing to play it in like pickup games, and I think that there's a lot of other decks that are like that for a lot of folks. Like people have their tournament deck, and then they have their more for fun deck that they're playing.
Yeah, like I'm definitely the same way right now. So for me, Tymna Thrasios is my tournament deck right now. I'm not even sure that it's the best deck or the best deck for me, but it has like I said, the most recoverability, which is what I like about it in tournaments a lot. Whereas Rogsai, I still have that deck together, but I don't really want to bring it to a tournament right now because every time I do, it really feels like the whole table is ready to stop me. I try to do my thing on turn 2, I get stopped, and I watch the game for the rest of it for most of the time. In cEDH pods, people are less likely to pregame discuss about how we should all be keeping Force of Wills to stop Rogsai. There's no draw talk. So the fact that there's no draw makes the metagame between cEDH and cEDH, tournament cEDH, different. They become different things. And I wonder if over time those will spread and our bracket 5 decks will be moved to, bracket 4.9 and 5.1 or something. Or
it'll be bracket 5 and bracket 6. There's TEDH and cEDH as like separate brackets.
Because
almost.
I do think that there is a difference, right? Like there is certainly the draw aspect of the time aspect of it. Those that changes the metagame.
Yeah.
Elevir, for instance, I think is a reasonable cEDH deck. I think it's a terrible TEDH deck.
Agreed. Yeah.
Stuff like Winota. I actually think Winota is a reasonable cEDH. I think what's the Abzan one that's losing my mind?
Tayam?
Tayam, I think, is a reasonable cEDH deck, but I don't know that it's a great TEDH deck right now because it can have a hard time closing the game in time. You know what I mean? Like Tayam. Decks that have a hard time closing the game in time. Shorakai maybe is another example of these decks, given 3 hours, you can win any game of Magic, but we don't have 3 hours. You have to win the game quickly, and that changes the metagame a lot.
I have one more question for you about what constitutes a fringe deck. New commanders.
Yeah.
When do they get slotted into tiers? Like when, I want to talk about the most recent set.
Aether Drift.
We got 3 commanders that are pretty good for cEDH.
Playable,
Ketramos, Hashatan, and then Loot the Pathfinder.
Yep.
My question is, at what point are we okay to slot these into
a tier
and know that Ketramos is fringe, Loot is tier 2, and Hashatan is tier 1.5 or whatever the fuck
Realistically,
it's gonna be?
I don't know. I'm not the math guy. My gut says, this is what Tyler always says to me, once you get to roughly 30
games is what we always say,
30 examples, then you're at a point where you're statistically, your average is going to make a little bit of sense. You know what I mean? Once you get to 30 games, you're there. So I would say for each of these decks, once we have 30 tournaments that they're in and we can get a realistic look at what their tournament win percentage would be in those 30 tournaments, that's when we would know for sure.
Maybe 30 months.
30.
Because what's a tournament? Is a tournament like something that pops up on Spice Rack that was like someone's locals?
No,
though?
60 person. I would say 60 person tournament. 60 person tournament would be like a tournament, a real sample size, or maybe 30 person, 30 person tournament is a real sample size. Realistically, I don't know. My gut says that I know where those decks sit because I understand cEDH and I know where they are.
We just kind of know where they will end up
But
sliding.
realistically,
Yeah.
when I first saw Hashton, I thought Hashton could be a tier 2 or tier 1 deck, and now I think it's a firm tier 3, maybe fringe deck. I don't know if it's going to have the weights to pull up like across real tournament results long term.
It's really funny watching everyone go, oh, wow, all of the stuff we've been so jazzed that this deck can do is bad.
Yeah.
You should just be sitting back on the good cards and just winning normally when we can.
Yeah, and I think the biggest issue, like the biggest realization for me was like the only time that I did win with the deck was with a regular consultation line, and it was with like a Grand Abolisher out too. And I was like, my other decks can do the Grand Abolisher thing. Like what you don't realize about the uncounterability aspect of the Hashaton is Hashaton can still be removed, or the trigger can still be responded to. So like even though it feels like it's hard to interact with, it's really not. It's pretty easy to interact with.
There's so much that you're sacrificing in your deck building process too, that like just having to play so many number of bad cards, just you don't want to be there in a tournament.
But I do feel that the deck long term, if someone learns it really well, I do think it could be a solid tier 3 or fringe deck, merely because it is kind of tricky to interact with if you don't know what the lines are. There are already like 3 or 4 very bizarre lines with the deck. So if you can get the deck to hum in a consistent way and do those difficult to interact with, but more importantly, people don't know when they're supposed to interact with lines, then maybe. But to me, it just felt like way too many pieces. Do you know what I mean? Like my opponents also don't know that I'm getting Grand Abolisher when I Eldritch Evolution. They might, but they might not. I have the same thing in my Tim Thrasios deck. I have the same way to get uncounterable, uninteractable wins, but I don't have to waste slots with Razakeths and whatever else to get there and discard outlets. I can just play good cards.
Yeah, I think Ketramos, for that reason, is also going to end up being in the fringe category because there's just too many pieces that you need. That's something else that a lot of the fringe decks have, is that they need a lot of pieces to win, and they have a hard time closing out the game.
Yeah, that's true.
And this is definitely one of those decks. It just needs too many pieces. It doesn't have the right tools to be able to come back in a lot of circumstances, and you can put yourself into situations where, like, you exile most of your deck on your cleanup step because something went wrong for you, and you have Planar Void or something that forces you to exile things as they hit your graveyard.
Yeah.
So
and Loot, I feel like, is going to have an issue of just like too fat. To 5 mana and then another mana to activate. Like, that's just a lot. We've seen decks like that before that do well for a little bit and are fun and exciting. Stuff like Paco and Halden comes to mind. Stuff like Atali comes to mind.
Rug, Fibblefip, and Borborygmos.
Right. This is a common thing of like biggish commander, but does a pretty good thing. Now, I will say Loot's thing is pretty good and it's pretty breakable. Like, it's pretty easy to reset that exhaust thing and draw 3 cards a bunch. I've seen Loot, the card, do some really powerful things, and I think it's one of the strongest figs we've gotten like that in a while.
We've gotten so many bad food chain commanders over the years that just fall immediately into the fringe category. And this is like the first bad food chain commander that actually feels better.
I compare it also to things like Niv Mizzet and Atraxa and Tivit that are like these big chunky commanders that you have to have 6 or 7 mana to do anything with. And Loot is only 5 mana, but you need that 1 extra. So if it feels in that same category of like, I don't want to bring a big commander deck to a tournament. I want my shit. I want to mulligan to 5 and know that I can still cast turn 1 Thrasios because like my deck is just like built to do that and built to mulligan. Whereas my fear is like with Loot, when you mulligan low, you're like, I'm never gonna cast my commander this game because it's 5 fucking mana. Like, and then it's hard
than
to build
Atali
up.
with that, because with Atali, I can mold to 5 or 4 and go, I can find Orcish Lumberjack, Forest, and LED, and I don't have to worry about shit, dude. I don't have to worry about shit.
Whereas
but like Loot
needs 3 pips.
Loot needs 3 pips plus like a card advantage engine and just like other things to operate within the game. It's tier 3 right now, and then it dips down into fringe.
It's hard to actually put them into tiers right now still because they're so new, but
they're being represented right now too, and that is an important part of tiering these.
Yeah, that's true. I wouldn't be surprised if they all land in like what we consider like a tier 3 category, but to me, out of the 3 of them, Loot at this point seems like the one that it's the most promising, and really because like it's in blue and it draws cards.
It's in blue and it draws cards.
It's in blue and that's good.
And it gets to play some of the best cards in the deck too.
And if you're a good Magic player, if you're a powerful magician, more choices is good for you. And giving 3 new choices every turn, that's good. That's why Timna's good. Timna can sometimes draw 3 cards a turn. Choices is really good if you know how to make the right ones. So for that reason, I think it's more playable than the other ones. Ketramos too, draw is powerful, but Ketramos, I feel like
it's not in blue.
Too much setup. And then what do? You draw a bunch of cards, someone casts Counterspell, and you go, all right, well, that's it.
Well, yeah, nothing I can do. Okay.
You gotta find Silence or Grand Abolisher or just like cross your fingers.
Play enough win conditions that you can just keep
go
going
over
and just hope that you have the mana.
And that's fun and that's cool. And if you like that, good for you. And that's why it's fringe. Because
exactly.
Still because of those
Exactly. That's why I have a tournament deck and I have have my for fun decks. I can be whatever the hell I want them to be. That's just like trying to get me to learn what else is available in cEDH. Just like other card interactions too that maybe I could use in my more tournament decks too. There's a lot of good use to getting to know these Fringe decks too, which is why I really do like to play them.
Yeah, I really would quick before we go on to the next thing. I want to talk about something about Magda real quick because Magda to me has been the epitome of a Fringe deck for a long time. But as of right now, I think it's impossible to ignore that Magda is just tier 1 deck in cEDH.
I fully agree. It was on that trajectory of going from Fringe to tier 1. So like it's not impossible. Keep working on your Fringe decks because you'll never know if you have the next. Well, sometimes you'll know that you don't have the next Magda.
Yeah, and when you have someone at Wizards who's obviously a Magda player, like I don't know that that's true. This is just a guess, but that new vehicle is just like the more I look at it, I'm like, this is fucking perfect.
It was
for Magda.
perfect.
It was written for Magda. The more of those type of effects that these niche Fringe decks get, the more powerful they'll become. Magda fits all those things that we were talking about Fringe decks, where it's a little bit singular focused and it has a lot of weird pieces and 1/1 dwarfs and that
get rid of the commander and then it can't do anything.
Right, yeah, but the issue is like at this point it's built around to like not care about that. You know what I mean? Like maybe it won't play Magda until it has 5 treasures or it has the land that buys it back from the command zone. You can cast it again. Like it does have a glaring weakness of like kill Magda twice and they're dead, but there's also other decks at the table that make it, there's other commanders that make that hard to do. And a lot of times Magda's your friend until they're not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Magda has out the Trinisphere that's stopping the Grixis player from going off until it's stopping you from interacting with them. You know what I mean? So for the time being, they get to play the hero. You have to keep them alive because they're keeping you alive until they're not anymore and they win the game. So they still have a lot of those recipes of the Fringe deck, but Magda specifically is just like the most powerful Fringe deck we've ever seen and has become a tier 1
that
deck,
got to upgrade its way all the way up there. And again, that's something else that not just power but also representation happens with too. You go to a tournament now, it's littered with Magda. Magda kicked my ass in 2 games in our tournament a couple weeks ago. So like and I played against it in a 3rd pod. So it's definitely around. People love the deck because they know that it can do some powerful things. So like it all kind of conglomerates to also be a tier 1 strategy with the bones of a Fringe deck.
Would you consider Magda a stacks deck right now?
Right now, I think there are more Magda players that are playing very light interactive stacks.
When you say light interactive stacks, what do you mean?
Sphere of Resistance. Things that are taxing mana. Torpor Orb.
They are playing Torpor Orb.
A lot of lists are on Torpor Orb. Yeah, I would say that most Magda decks have a lot of epitomes of stacks decks that they turn out to be.
Epitome, that's a good choice.
It's not, because that's not what...
No, it's not right. That's why I think it's a good choice. I don't think it works there, but it's still a good, it's an interesting choice.
Yeah, it's the hyperbole of a Fringe deck.
Realistically, I think I agree with you that realistically, the scale of is this a stacks deck is a very grayish thing. On one end, we have, I mentioned Elevir earlier. A lot of times I hear talks of Elevir as like a win-con-less stack. A lot of times green-white decks are win-con-less stacks or whatever. There's just not a lot of win-cons in green-white. That would be like a 10 out of 10 stacks deck. Magda is like a 9 out of 10 stacks deck. But for today's standards for 2025 in cEDH, I think Magda is the closest that we have to real stacks. Tayam is there too. You know what I mean? I just think Magda's better. Magda is like the good version of that.
If you want to play stacks in tier 1, you play Magda.
Magda is the way to do it.
If you want to play stacks anywhere else right now, you're jumping down to tier 3.
Right, yeah. And not that it's like a hard stacks deck. It's not locking the game out forever, making sure no one can cast spells. All cEDH decks are tempo decks right now. They're just doing what they need to for just long enough until they can win. But Magda is the closest we have to stacks.
Yeah, like you play cards like Tangle Wire, not just to slow your opponent down, but to also make sure that they don't have the availability to interact with you. It's like when we were talking about with Blood Moon in Italy, where like it acts as a rule of law. Like that's what they're trying to do. They're not just trying to play stacks for stacks' sake. And a lot of them aren't just trying to play.
They're not playing Sphere of Resistance so that you can't cast all of your spells. They're playing Sphere of Resistance so that you can't cast the one relevant spell in your hand that fucks with them.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're trying to get you to tap out on your turn instead of leaving up mana for something else.
It's not necessarily to stop you from doing anything. That's a nice bonus sometimes, but what it's there to do is to protect Magda. Magda can't run counter spells, so Trinisphere makes your Force of Will cost 3 mana. Not that Magda needs to resolve spells most of the time, but sometimes they do. And for that's why their stacks pieces are good.
Yeah, so like you could, if you wanted to, play Grafdigger's Cage in your Magda deck, but I wouldn't recommend also putting in Soulless Jailer as like another effect that stops the same thing. God Pharaoh statue. Like that's another card that you get to play.
And the play pattern of that deck is just like make 5 treasures and pass, and then just like wait for someone to do something and either like win the game or get some sort of stacks piece that stops them from winning the game, or do something like that. Like I think that's a good spot to be. Sisay benefits from the same thing.
Yeah,
like, I'm gonna have 5 mana up, and like my Sisay is a 4/4, and I'm just gonna maybe pass the turn right now and wait for everyone to do something, and then on end step maybe I'll find a Cutzel, or I'll find something that can, I don't know, stop you from what you're doing or something like that. I think those decks are well positioned right now.
Yeah, I think so too.
You have any other fringe decks you want to talk about?
There's a couple here. Yeah, Redshift is one that we brought up last week very quickly.
Made top 16 of our tournament.
Yeah, and I do have the top 16 list in front of me here.
Yeah, this is a weird one that this is one that like I feel like it attacks the meta in an interesting way, maybe?
It kind of does. So Redshift is a red and a green for a 2/3 legendary goblin pilot with vigilance, and you can tap them to add X mana of any one color, where X is Redshift's power. You spend this mana only to activate abilities. But for 10 a green and a red, so 12 mana total, you can exhaust him to put any number of permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield.
Yeah, so once you get to that amount of mana, it's like sort of infinite mana. Not really, but like you get a one shot of infinite mana.
It basically is, yeah.
But I imagine at that point, like in cEDH, if you have that much mana, you have literal infinite mana, right?
If you get to 12.
Makes them uncounterable, kind of. That's nice, I suppose.
I guess maybe it's so that you can put multiple things that you've been working up towards into play, but you're in green-red, so I don't even know how you work up towards anything without the game going super long. This list is also very different than the one that I got to play in the tournament.
Okay. Yeah, there were 2 Redshift decks in the tournament.
There were at least 2 that were there, and the one that I played against, Court of Calling for Atali at one point, and this list is not playing Atali. Or Court of Calling.
Can I take a look at the list?
I think this list is trying to go a little bit more in on Redshift. It plays Emrakul, the Promised End, as like a really good thing to Redshift in. I think a lot of the times what you can do when you take control of someone else's turn is you can get them to take out the other 2 players, because you're not going to interact with them. And then you can do stuff to their board so that you can just beat that one player.
Is this like Selvala stuff where we're untapping a lot and boosting power?
Yeah, so if you scale up your Redshift, that makes his power 6, which means if you can untap him once and then tap him again, that's the 12 mana in order to put his ability onto the stack.
Invigorate. Okay, yes. Now I'm seeing what we're doing here a little bit more. Selvala is the name of the one I'm thinking of, right?
Marwyn also does this.
Yeah, mono green Selvala. We've been talking about green white Selvala. Mono green Selvala.
Yeah, mono green Selvala and Marwyn.
I hadn't really thought of this as a red green Selvala. That actually makes it pretty good.
And I think you can use that mana to activate abilities. So what's really cool is if you scale up your Redshift.
Oh, it can only activate abilities.
Yeah, but you can scale up your Redshift, which means you can tap them for 6 mana and put that mana into an aggravated assault. And then when you go to the next combat, you untap Redshift and then tap them again to activate aggravated assault.
So rather than it being stormy and just like, I hope I can keep going and make a chunk of mana, you have like a determined, like, I'm going to make 12 mana, exhaust my guy, and put whatever permanents I have in play, and then hope me putting, 4 permanents in play is good enough. Maybe one of them's an aggravated assault, or one of them, something like that.
Or there's like aggravated assault. There's other abilities too that would end up working out with this as well. Like if you have ways that you can continuously untap them. I know there's a creature in there that for a red and some number of generic mana, it deals a damage to each opponent too.
Welter Automaton.
Yeah, so like there's infinite mana outlets that you can get into, where like if you can make infinite mana for activated abilities, you can put that into these other creatures and then use them to win the game.
Marvin, I feel like, is another one that's
perfect
just like,
one for this deck.
It's like a perfect key to so many fringe decks that just turns them on a little bit. It's great in Oswald. Anytime your commander has to activate abilities, I think Marvin is so incredible, because if you play Marvin the turn before, you pseudo give your commander like haste for that activated ability when it comes in, which is really huge.
It's been super good for me in Stella Lee. I've seen it insane in Oswald. Like, again, any of those commanders that have a tap ability, it's nutty in.
Yeah, Marvin's definitely good glue for those fringe decks.
Yeah, so this Redshift one, I don't know how much we'll see it. It can't really interact with the table, which is kind of the problem. I
still view it right now, until I see it and play a little bit more. I'm gonna view it as like a fringe deck. I think the decks that move past that have something really, really unique, like Magda that can tutor its deck. You know what I mean? Like what it does is kind of unique, but it's really just mana. It's just a bunch of mana. You know what I mean? That's kind of what it's doing, and it feels stoppable. But you'll definitely get some Brewer's advantage with this deck, I feel like, because I said I don't even know.
For sure. I think it fits the mold of Fringe very easily, because I think there's an argument for like Ketramos, Hashiton, and Loot not being Fringe because of how new they are, and it will take a long physical amount of time, not like a tournament amount of time or games amount of time. It will take a physically long amount of time for people to forget them.
Getting 30 deck results in for a cEDH tournament, there's not that many cEDH tournaments. Like there's more now than there was 5 years ago, but it's just gonna take a while. It's gonna take a few months.
But I almost need them to make no appearances in 30 tournaments for me to consider them Fringe at this point, because like they're being tested out and they're new, so everyone knows what their combos are, and then you show up with Redshift and everyone goes, I paid attention to so many cards from Aether Drift and this was not one of them.
Yes.
So like I feel like that kind of fits the mold a little bit more, and maybe as we keep talking about this, I'm starting to feel like the tier 3 cEDH is huge. Like Atali fits into tier 3 because everyone knows what Atali does, and like he's been around for a while, even though the bans slowed him down a little bit. But at the same time, like he doesn't have the same Redshift effect. He doesn't have the same 6-mana Planeswalker Teferi effect where you get to play so many weird cards like that people don't want to interact with you because they see bad cards. Like Atali, they know you just need to get to 7 mana. So they can count your mana and go, now you're a threat. You weren't 2 turns before, and now you are. I'm going to bolt your bird or something like that. Whereas Redshift, there is almost never a scenario where you want to use your removal or counter spells on something that they're doing, because what if it's shit? What if it's not doing anything?
And that's where you get an advantage, right?
Exactly. Like when the Planeswalker Teferi won 2 Black Lotuses, it was running cards in it that were like 5 mana, you and another player each draw 3 cards, and you and another player each swap permanents, or whatever the fuck that card is, right? Like you read that card and you go, this is bad. They're casting Thran Dynamo. This is bad. I'm not Besajuing it. And then they win the game with those cards. It's like I'm just thinking that maybe tier 3 is bigger than I thought it was.
Yeah, and realistically, the more that we talk about this, I'm not sure if Fringe and tier 3 are really all that different, because we kind of talked about earlier how about Fringe is specifically the unknown, and I don't know that that's true. Like there are certain decks that people do know how they play, but they just don't see it. I don't know. Like, is that a specific difference? That Fringe is a little bit more unknown?
Is it Fringe if the guy in your weekly pod plays it every week? Like, is that Fringe?
It's not.
Yeah, because you know how it works, and the rest of your pod knows how it works.
So I kind of want to refine my definition of what Fringe is, and then just Fringe are decks that do not see a ton of tournament results. What a ton of tournament results means, I'm not sure, but I don't know necessarily that they are unknown decks. I think that can be a little bit of a different thing.
Yeah.
I think that Fringe decks usually are unknown decks, but I don't think it necessarily means that if you are people know how to do it, you're not Fringe. You're just tier 3.
It's a subcategory of Fringe, or the unknown decks that have Brewer's Advantage.
Yes.
It's Fringe, and then there's like the Brewer's Advantage decks, and there's the I'm just trying to have fun, let me do my thing decks.
Right. So I would like to say that in cEDH we have tier 1, we have tier 2, and then we have Fringe. And then everything in Fringe is tier 3. It's what tier 3 is, and there's just different levels of it.
I couldn't ask for a better place to end the podcast. I feel like it took us how long? Just under an hour to figure out what Fringe decks in cEDH are, and now we know what they are. It's everything that's not in tier 1 or tier 2.
Everything outside of that is Fringe, and all of those decks are still really powerful. All of those decks will destroy bracket 4 decks. Not all the time, but most of the time. Atali is going to destroy most bracket 4 decks, right? Atali is better in bracket 4. Holy shit. Because no one's got counter spells, and everyone's got big shit that you can take, right? So like it's way better.
Oh, Atali's nutty in bracket 4,
And I wonder, I don't know. This is a whole nother topic of like, sometimes I wonder, like, if you put a regular cEDH deck in 3 bracket 4 decks, is that cEDH deck actually going to be able to be good? Because like it's just not meant, like your Force of Wills or your Daze is no good there or whatever. You know.
Well, I have a whole other thing. I think bracket 4 is too big. I'm starting to think bracket 4 might just be too big. We might need a separate, like another little thing in between 3 and 4.
We're gonna have 10 brackets.
We're gonna, all of a sudden it's gonna be back to I have 7.
All right, that's it. That's the podcast. Thanks so much for watching. If you'd like to support us directly, you can do so on Patreon, like our $100 patrons.
Pat Fires, Spangler, Demetrius Clark, Larceny Roars, Your Boy Blue, Sparky B, Insomnia, SC Phillip, Olden Groupie, Gecko21, Caleb Ritchie, Zach Hartley, Reactive, Sean in the Ice, Garrett Peoples, Luke Cook, Joshua Day, Demon of Rosgrees, Peter Stewart, Cornell Wild, Uncle Butts, Nick Foles Go to 9, Quajay Hamid, Lauren Condell, Scott Hawk, and Baby G-Bus.
If you want to pick up any of our merch, you can do that at playtowinmtg.com.
Thank you, Dragon Shield, for supporting the show. Use code PlayToWin5 at our affiliate link down below for 5% off their stuff.
Follow us on social media for more content.
Thank you for watching.
See you next time.
Ryan Ward, Dan the Man, Deadbeat Scott, Ghost Stories, Sarcastic, Roy Turner, Bill Bob, Mystic Muffin Man, Zachary Coulson, Jabaha, Mace the Ace, Dalton Poteet, Justin, Man Solo, Jan Wildfang, Thomas Bueno, and David Nelson.
Cool.
Cool.
Is that a podcast?
I think so.
Okay.